We're recording. Welcome to the Unscripted Podcast, guys. My name is Karan Kudlani, and I'm your host for the episode. My guest on this episode is Davis Nguyen. He graduated from Yale with a degree in economics, and he also founded Myconsultingoffer and is very experienced in the field of consulting. Hey, hi, Davis. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on today.
It's really great having you. Do you want to add anything to your introduction?
No, as in, I think we're gonna have a great podcast listening to all the other ones in the previous one. So your listeners will get to know me pretty well as yourself throughout this. So I'll save all the introductions for later.
Yeah, I definitely look forward to hearing more about all your experiences. Definitely a lot to learn from there. Just starting off with the question, I asked every single person we start off with their basics from where they go back. You did a degree in your undergrad, and you did a degree from Yale. Definitely great degree from in economics as well. Something I'm doing right now. I'm doing finance and economics as well. So, what was going into Yale? As I've listened to your TED talk, I've listened to a lot of things. What were a few of the things when you got into Yale? What was the expectation when you got into Yale? What were special things that you learned over there that made your journey ahead really different from others? What do you think were the main things that impacted your life?
I would say a few things impacted my life during my time at Yale. It was definitely at the time the best 4 years of my life. I'll tell you, life gets better afterwards as well. But people always say that college is your best 4 years. It is like up to that point it is, and then afterwards life gets better. But I would say the biggest differential is that I was the first person in my family to go to college. So, for example, my mom, I was raised by a single mom. She didn't finish third grade, and my grandparents didn't finish high school before my grandfather was basically fighting in the Vietnam War and so forth. And so there was this bridge where when my family, so in order to answer that question, you have to know where my family came from. So even though I was born in the US, my family prior, my mom, my grandparents, they immigrated from Vietnam prior. So they're political refugees from the Vietnam War. And as a result of that, when you're a political refugee, similar to a lot of the crises that are happening right now, for example, at the time of recording, you have the Ukrainian refugees, you don't exactly get to pick where you live, right? You don't just go to the US and it's like, oh, I want to live in Orange County or I want to live in Atherton, California. It doesn't work like that, right? It's like,
Yeah.
where can you afford? Who will take you in? And for us, the community that took us in was a poor community in South Atlanta. So as a result, when we grew up there, the environment I grew up in, we we had high rates of poverty. In fact, it was like I think 1 out of every 5 people or family households live below the poverty line. And so there was not much expectation to go to college. And because my family, I always say this, that my family, they're the opposite of tiger parents. So the term tiger parents, if you guys
Yeah.
are any following it, is like kind of like, oh yeah, you have to be good. You're an Asian, go to college and so forth. I always joke that my family were like panda parents. They were like, all right, just do whatever, just don't die. And so education was really something that I had to push towards. And so when I got to Yale, I was the first generation, and people prior, I didn't really have a connection there already, similar to other friends of mine who had people who were their seniors coming in from previous years to the university. So the biggest for me was being a first generation, going to a place like Yale and having to one, adapt to the college life, but also second, knowing like I come from this such a different background, as in when I got there, as in I definitely did not fit the fashion sense. I had no clue what I should have been doing for my first days in college. And I had to figure out all this on my own. And a part of that was part of the growing journey, which eventually would make my time amazing, is just being able to bridge that gap and just being able to eventually still own where I came from, but evolve who I was during that time and just grow from the variety of people who came. Like, for example, I didn't know anyone who skied. I had no clue anyone who played racquetball or anything like that, or had a private home on Long Island. I had knew none of this until I was so used to just people growing up in my community. We were about 80% minority. So just having a different landscape all of a sudden and just a different preference. So I was just so used to, for example, in my high school being one of the few people who answer all the questions. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, everyone's here to learn. Everyone's challenging one another. This is such a great environment. And I would say that was one of the biggest learnings, was just being able to diverse and converse with different people from a diverse background, which I'm sure you're getting as well, given your background and how big Ohio State is.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. I think that's a really important point to have in mind, and I think your story is really inspiring. Doing that, going in from where you were, and taking in going in as refugees into the United States, and then after that, making it to Yale. I think that's really really inspiring to anyone out there. So, talking about your time in college, you went into Yale. What were some of the involvements, especially? I think the involvements, when everyone goes into college, the involvements play such a key role in finding their job later and, meeting new people. So what do you think were your key involvements at Yale?
So again, my background was so different, which is that my parents never forced me, for example, to play violin or to do math team or anything. There's just things I was just interested in high school. And so I just pursued it. And so same thing happened when I was in college. Was instead of thinking, oh, what should I do in order for me to get the next job? My joke coming in was like, wow, I'm gonna graduate from Yale. Even if I have like a D average, I'm still going to graduate from Yale at some point and I'm going to be employable forever. This is like amazing, like different lens, right? Of where I was coming from. And so to me, I didn't have an agenda. Like, for example, I didn't go into campus thinking, okay, I'm going to join the Yale Political Union. I'm going to join the Yale Daily News, or I'm going to join the Yale Consulting Club. It was more of what am I interested in? And this is 4 years. So a little bit of background is that because I grew up with my mom didn't finish third grade. She's also paralyzed. I've been financially supporting her since I was 13. And so college to me seemed like the first time where, wow, I can actually just roam around and have a little bit more freedom. So obviously I'm still sending money home to my mom, but it was more freedom. So instead of saying I have to join the Yale Political Union or whatever, Yale Daily News, even though I did write and do some speeches for both, for me, it was more of, what do I want to do and where my passions are at the time? Let's just explore. And so I ended up joining everything from a dance group, which I've never danced before, just because I was like, I want to explore it, and ended up doing that for 4 years and just loved it. Joined the Yale Magic Society because I wanted to learn how to do magic just to entertain people, and obviously explored my roots, did Asian American community groups, as well as led many of them. So at the same time, my junior year, I was president or director equivalent of about 7 organizations, but none of them I would say propelled me. It's like, oh, this is going to help me become an entrepreneur, or this is going to help me become a management consultant. It was more of developing the passion, the skills, but at the same time, just surrounding myself with people who I actually enjoyed doing. I always joke that classes were almost secondary to me, to my extracurriculars, and just being involved and just pushing at everything I wanted to be able to do. So everything I did, I thought, wow, how can we grow this? How can we make a 10x difference on the campus? Like, for example, every organization I join is like, well, if we're hosting a conference with just our students, how can by the time I graduate, we host this for an entire region of the United States? For a club that was just starting, it's like, well, we only have 15 members, but how about we have 150 members by the end of the year? Or if their club was already doing well, it's like, how do we continue to expand that? And so that was for me. But it's just everything I loved. I wanted to be able to grow it and to pursue it even further.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. I think that's really important to have, and I think going into that clear passion of just doing whatever you like, that definitely helps succeed in life. A lot of people go in there, try to do things which they're not living their own dreams. A lot of the people I know personally, and after a point they're just frustrated and they're just like overburdened by things they're doing. So I think just having a clear mindset of doing what you like, you're easily going to succeed in what you do. So um you worked as you spoke about this a little. You worked as a management consultant. How do you think that working as a management consultant for one of the top companies? I don't know if I can take the name of the company, but
Yeah,
it's a
absolutely.
okay
Yeah,
for
yeah.
yeah, you work for Bain, right?
I work for Bain and Company. Yes.
Yeah, Bain's one of the top management consultancy companies, and I think after that, what do you think? How did your time at Bain impact you starting your own company, Myconsultingoffer?
Sure. So let's take a step back about how I became a management consultant. So as I mentioned,
Yeah.
I grew up in a community where a lot of my friends, for example, are now like managers of a Waffle House or a Walmart or a Chick-fil-A or McDonald's and so forth. So it's kind of like the community, you're not really expected to leave. And so when someone is able to leave, it's amazing. So management consulting I didn't even know what that was. So I'll tell you about a joke of this is that when I was a freshman, we had one of our freshman dinners. So we just got there, it's about a weekend. And I'm sitting next to a group of people, and one of the girls in the group ended up becoming one of my best friends at Yale. And somebody proposed, oh, what do you guys want to do after Yale? And in my mind, I'm like, I just got here. I was trying to kind of figure out what I want to do. But everyone's going around. And then the girl who would eventually become one of my best friends, she said, I want to be an investment banker. Or she said banker. And I was like, banker? Like, I got friends who did banking in high school. They're like, they get paid like $11 an hour. So like, I don't think you need a Yale degree. I didn't say that to her, but I'm like, I don't get it. And of course, the idea of Wall Street and investment banking did never occur to me, because that's like the community I grew up in. One person was like a lawyer, wanted to be a corporate lawyer. I was like, oh, the only lawyers I know are like criminal lawyers and divorce lawyers from my community, And so I was like, this is pepper, right? So when someone said management, I had no clue what that was. And so every summer I would actually intern. So what I did was I wanted to just explore my interests. And so similar to you, I would just email people who I looked up to. Like if I read a book, like for example, one summer I was reading a book, Quiet, by Susan Cain, who gave one of the most popular TED Talks of all time. I just wanted to work with her. So I just code emailed her and eventually landed an internship. One summer I read this book called Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi, ended up emailing him and worked for him. And so that's how I built up these connections of people. And eventually at the end of the summer, they're like, Davis, love your energy, but you should consider something called management consulting. It really would roughen or smooth out your rough edges and also teach you some skills you'll always learn. And they basically said, it'll do three things for you. One, it'll allow you to be able to communicate with anyone around the world and just be able to see different types of environments. Second is it's going to give you a business skill set that you're going to have for the rest of your life, no matter what you do. And third, it's just going to make you a better thinker. So think of it as college for another 4 years, except you get paid to solve problems. So the more it describes to me, it's like, oh, that sounds pretty interesting, to be able to work at these big companies with these CEOs when you're 21, and you get to essentially be in a room with these people who've been in industry for 40 years and soak in all that knowledge, but be able to do that in such a short time period. How many people can do that? And I was like, okay, well, I want to become a management consultant. And so that's when I decided, I went back to campus my senior year. I had about 3 weeks to prepare for the interview process while my friends were preparing for like years. Like some of them had fathers and mothers and uncles who were working at these firms already, like Bain, McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Accenture, Deloitte. And here I was starting from scratch, but I trusted my mentors. I trusted Keith Ferrazzi, Susan Cain, a few others who said, Davis, you should start in management consulting. And that's how I ended up at Bain and Company. Was when it came down to it, I looked at all the groups and I was lucky enough to get multiple offers. And I ended up choosing Bain and Company just because a lot of the people who came there ended up becoming entrepreneurs. So I was looking at like Andy Dunn, who founded Bonobos, the Warby Parker founders, and even others, like for example, Adam Braun, who founded Pencils of Promise, a nonprofit in education. And I thought, wow, if they all came from Bain, I should probably pick Bain. And that's how I ended up choosing Bain, was just going in there, and I wanted to see the entrepreneurial spirit at the company, and I absolutely did. And that's what prepared me to be an entrepreneur, was those three things that my mentors promised, which is the ability to work and interact with different people, the business skill set that you're going to learn in just 2 years in consulting, and third, just the confidence you have in your own problem solving skills, and just being able to think holistically. Like for example, nowadays it's like any problem that comes along, you use the consulting skill set and you're able to more or less solve it. And it's a skill that I've had ever since.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's important to have. That consulting mindset is very, very important. You can solve anything. I think for anyone in finance and economics, the main choices go into investment. At least at my college, it's mostly investment banking or consulting, and then people are choosing between the two. So it's just that, people are just like, okay, consulting or investment banking. And I think I've definitely, trying to get into consulting as well. I think consulting is pretty interesting and definitely helps you. Definitely, try helping out a lot of people in the community with. So as you said, you started your own company, Myconsultingoffer. How was the process of getting a company like that up and running? What was the main market? How did you market it to people out there? Because no one's going to trust coming into the market. No one's going to trust an entrepreneur, but you have to build that name for yourself to do that. How do you think that happened?
Sure. So you have two questions there. One is the start of why did I even start Myconsultingoffer? And then second is how do we get our first initial traction, right? So I want to answer both of those. So I'll say this, like the first thing is sometimes you just fall into an idea. And at least for me, after Bain, I got an offer to essentially become part of the leadership team at a startup that was in the education space. So given where I grew up and the environment I grew up in, I knew the power of education to be able to change your life. Like take someone whose mom was living on welfare and all of a sudden you take him to Yale. He's able to find a place like Bain and Company to work, and it completely changes the trajectory of his life and future generations. And so I thought that is the power of education. But how do we scale this? And so I was at Bain, and similar to when I was back in college, I just kept reaching out to people. And eventually I was put in contact with one of the founders of a startup that was in the education space, and they were going through Y Combinator at the time. And so I had a choice of staying at Bain or leaving. And I was like, wow, this is an opportunity. I can always come back to Bain, but this is an amazing opportunity to be a part of this team that's going through Y Combinator, which is the #1 accelerator for startups. So I decided, well, let's leave and take a chance on this. And so that's how I ended it. But because it's a startup, we were still in California. So I took about a 40% pay cut to come and work at this company. And the two other things was that I'm still living in California. So still cost of living, taxes, I'm still supporting my mom. And so I needed to figure out how to bridge that gap. And so when I was at Bain, I did a lot of recruiting, one of my favorite extracurriculars. So earlier you asked me about my extracurriculars. I always love doing it. Even at Bain, I joined and started and ran at least 5 or 6 different, call it extracurriculars we had at Bain, everything from like the poker club to bringing speakers on to an entrepreneurial venture discussion group and so forth. And so one of the things I did was recruiting. So I would figure out and make sure that Bain had the next group of consultants coming in. And so I had a ton of experience knowing how to get those interviews, and of course, passing those interviews, given my own experience of having only 3 weeks. And so I was very active. And at the time, because I was in San Francisco, University of Berkeley is like right there. And so a few students reached out who had known me before and just said, hey, David, I saw you left Bain. It's like, would you be willing to revise my resume cover letter or do some practice interviews with me? I'll pay you. And I was like, huh, maybe this is the start of something. And so that's the start of Myconsultingoffer, which at the time didn't have a name. It was just me providing a ton of value. And then when they got offers at McKinsey, Bain, BCG, Accenture, Deloitte, and all these other firms, just word kept spreading really quickly. And soon I had more than I could do on my own. And so I was like, well, now I'm divided between the two. And at the time, a family member of mine had a medical emergency. There was like a $20,000 bill that needed to be paid. And plus I wanted to spend time with my family. And so decided to wrap up my time at the education startup and go full time on Myconsultingoffer. And that was the start of it. So if I had to say why I started, it was more of I needed to make some income and to help provide my mom and also to fund this education company. But the second part of it, how do we market it, was just one of my favorite quotes is from one of my favorite quotes from Charlie Munger, who he writes, the best source of future work is the work right in front of you. And it's kind of like, if you do an amazing job on anything that you're doing, more will come. And to this day, our biggest traffic source is still like word of mouth. Obviously, when people get offers and their friends like, oh, how did you get your McKinsey offer? They're like, oh, I used my consulting offer. Then it comes. And so that's still our biggest traffic source to this day. And so it all started from those initials. So how did the marketing work? It was just doing an amazing job with the first few people who came to the program, and they referred other people and they referred other people and so forth.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely very interesting. Word by mouth is the main reason, and it always helps a lot. Listening to someone, if I went to Myconsultingoffer and I told someone else, I think that's the best way of marketing. And you guys did really, really well in that. What do you've been working in Myconsultingoffer for a few years now. I know I was just reading up your LinkedIn. I think you've been working there for a few years. Have there been any like special stories or experiences? Anything that you want to share that, anything that you learned out of it?
Yeah, sure. So we can go on hours on things I learned and so forth. But I think one of the things is that you should always, one of the things I always tell the team is that with a reason, you can weather all seasons. So with any startup, there's like ups and downs and so forth. Like, for example, when COVID happened and firms weren't sure if they were hiring, I was like, uh-oh, I have a big team now. What am I going to do? What am I going to tell them, right? But the thing that I always go back to, and the things that are probably my favorite memories, is that on average, we get 3 new testimonials every single week. And we have a backlog currently at this time of recording, like 40 other testimonials we need to be able to produce, but our editor can only do so many per week. And so one of my proudest things is that looking at our reviews page, like our testimonials, people who are willing to go on camera, and most people don't go on camera, actually. It's like we can get hundreds of offers, but only like a percentage will want to actually leave a testimonial. But for those who do, it makes my day. Like every time I have a bad day, like during 2020 when we went through COVID for the first time, I was like, well, what's going to happen? Or is the business going to exist after 2020? If the firms are not hiring, are we entering a recession? What's happening? And I went back to the video, and at the time we only had about 100 something videos. Nowadays we have like closer to 200, 300 videos. And so I would go back into the testimonial page and just listened to some of the stories that we've made an impact. And at the time, we're only in business for 2-3 years. And I was like, wow, if we can impact that many lives, what else can we do? It just gives me the motivation to go. And I always think about that as well, is like on days when I'm feeling low on it for any other reason, especially during the COVID early times, I would just go back to reviews pages and just make an impact on and see the impact we're making on lives. And I said that's probably the biggest story to share, just because in anything that you do, if you're an entrepreneur, if you don't love what you're doing and you're not willing to commit the next 5-10 years of your life to doing it, you should probably do something else. Because if your goal is to make an impact on it and you're not willing to do it for a long time, or even if it's money, whatever it is, there's like probably easier ways to do it. But for entrepreneurship, it's just a hard path. It's just to have a reason. And if you have an amazing product and if you have amazing stories, and it just lifts me up. And that's basically the biggest thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think COVID was a very hard period for people and a lot of the companies. I was looking around the world, a lot of the companies had losses and everything. And many companies I know personally shut down because of COVID. It was really sad to see that happen. But going through that phase, if you can maintain it, that's really that's a strong point for a company to have.
Mhm.
Can you've done a lot of projects and everything, talking about your company, but can you talk about the importance? A lot of people don't understand the importance consulting has on an everyday world. What do you think is the most important thing you've learned out of consulting, and how do you think you guys impact everyday people's lives every day?
Sure. So I'll talk about it in two ways: the consulting job itself, and then what you learn afterwards. So the consulting job itself is almost like a business school where you're actually working on projects. So for example, one week I was helping to launch a life-saving drug for a biotech company. And then a month later, I was helping a software company develop their go-to-market plan for a new country. And then the next company, I was working with a tech company that was launching a hardware product. I was doing customer research. They were flying me everywhere to have customers and potential users to test the new beta. So it's like super amazing to be able to test on those varieties. So consultants definitely bring a variety of skills and a lot of knowledge from different industries into it. But on a personal side, how does it affect your day-to-day life? It's like, even when you leave, you just cannot stop but think about problems. Like whenever there's a problem, like for example, when I'm taking a summer trip this summer, and if it's like, for example, if someone proposed me, hey Davis, should we go to LA, Las Vegas, or Austin? I was like, all right, so let's break it down to a couple of factors here for each of these. And so it's kind of like you have a logical tree to be able to solve these problems. And other things too, like for example, when you have a lot coming at you as an entrepreneur, you can learn how to prioritize and work with people. And so that's like the skill set is, and it's just, you just feel more confident, as in, I can see why my mentors recommended me to go into consulting. And at first, back then, when it first happened, when they told me that they wanted me to go to consulting, I thought, oh, am I not good enough to continue working with you at a startup? But then I realized they were quite the opposite. They weren't selfish. They were quite the opposite. They were selfless in the sense that they knew that me jumping into a startup right away, as in we hear about the Mark Zuckerberg, so forth, the Bill Gates, but for more of those, there are a lot more people who come from traditional backgrounds who start a company than there are people who started from 19 and so forth. And so they were trying to teach me a lesson, which is that there's a solid foundational skill that you need to learn that's going to set you up for life. And so I'm just going to be grateful for that, because it's just, you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And when you know it, you're like, you can't unsee it.
Yeah, well, for sure. That's definitely a great answer. I think, having that skill of breaking everything down, that really helps you in life. And, after the consulting process, how do you think that, let's say the word networking is so important, LinkedIn, I think one of the greatest tools ever created. Personally, I met you on LinkedIn, and, I met a lot of people I meet from the podcast on LinkedIn. How do you think how important do you think networking is? How do you think that impacted your life personally?
Growing up where I grew up, where there weren't many social connections to be had or people who call it made it, I can see the power of networking, but I don't see networking as this negative word or this negative connotation, but it's more like people only want you in your network, like people who can create positive values. And for me, you can't do everything on your own. As in, I think for my family, they have this immigrant mindset. And that's one of the things I had to go to and shift when I was in high school. I was so used to people doing everything on their own. For a lot of the projects I worked on in high school, it's like you work it on your own. But when you go to college, it's like, you know that you can't do everything on your own. Like even your podcast team, you're not doing everything yourself. And it's the same way, is that one of the things that you learn that you need to be able to depend on others. And the previous question was about consulting, and consulting really forces you because you cannot do all the work yourself. You really do need to work with the clients and the teams to be able to do it. And that's where the power of networking comes in, is that it's being able to provide value. So one of my mentors who I worked with, Keith Farazi, he basically has a word. He says that the quality of your life is the quality of your relationships. And instead of looking at networking as a negative or a bad thing, think of it as how much value can you create to people. And I would say that for me, my networking strategy in college, as well even now, is how can I provide value to people? And even if I get nothing back in return, that's not the purpose of it. It's about to be able to build it out. And so for me, that's the point of networking, is not to seem sneezy, trying to get an internship or a job or whatever. It's like how you can genuinely provide value to people's lives.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I think that's an important thing to have. That's important. I think, yeah, networking definitely matters after a point. It's just that it depends. Like you told me that, you grew up in that area and then people over there didn't exactly network. But I think it just now the world is getting closer, with LinkedIn, everything, you're networking, you have it easier than it was before. What do you gave a TED talk. How do you think was when you found out that you were going to give a TED talk? What was the experience and what did you talk about in the TED talk?
I was honored. I was honored to be invited. So that's the first thing, right? And for me, it was less about what can I provide, and it was more about how can I impact other people's lives from this talk. And so for my talk, it was more about, anyone can watch it. Hopefully you'll save it to the show notes. Is basically the talk was about just how you can impact people's lives from who you are. It doesn't matter what you are. And I won't spoil it, but I talk about how at the time I didn't have any money. I was just a college student backpacking. And the only skill I brought was literally I could read in English. And how I helped this family who was basically on the verge of essentially running out of money, running out of resources, and with just one sign, being able to make a sign and some flyers for her, basically completely revolutionized and empowered her and her family to be able to self-sustain their income there. And so I'll leave that for people who want to watch the talk. Otherwise, I'm just going to repeat the whole 12 minutes here.
Yeah, for sure. I think I saw the talk, recently. Before I contacted you, I saw the talk and I was blown away by the talk. I think it was amazing. It was the story was really, really good, and it actually put into play what you guys do every day in consulting, but in a social way. You actually impact someone's life in a great way, and I think that's something really, really good. What are some of the hobbies you like to follow in your free time?
Free time. When I have free time, what I like to do is always make time to go to the gym pretty much every day, or at least walk out in the sun. I think physical health is just so important. Like you don't have to lift weights, you don't have to go yoga or aerobics or anything like that, but just being able to take care of your health. I came into college. One of the revolutions I had was I was about 45 pounds overweight when I started university. And by the time I was out, I was like, I just love eating healthy and just going to the gym and so forth. But it was just, I saw the energy coming back to me. And it's like one of those things where when you have that transformation, you just don't want to get back. So for me, going out, being active a little bit when I'm free is huge. And then second is I'm huge into escape rooms. So for anyone who doesn't know what escape rooms is, it's such a consultant type hobby, which is you're locked into a room with a bunch of people, it could be friends mainly, and you have an hour or so, sometimes an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever the time period is, and you have to figure out how to get out of the room. And so for me, I've done over 100 of these rooms all around the world. And so even during COVID, I did virtual escape rooms. And so it was just one of those hobbies I just really enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great hobby to have. Gym definitely helps you with your basic overall mental health, and I think I like escape rooms personally as well. Yeah. It helps you solve so many things, and I'm going to take your word upon that. We should do an escape room if I ever meet you in person, of course. Yeah. No. What were some of the hurdles? You spoke a little bit about this. The hurdles you came across coming in from the place you were. But what were some of the hurdles you came across personally, in your life? Other than those, were there any hurdles starting your company? You spoke a little bit about it, but any hurdles at all except that part, before your life, or anything which impacted your life?
A lot of hurdles. I would say if there could be one of these days, I'll probably write a book about hurdles in my life and overcoming it. But to me, it's almost like hurdles just what I think about hurdles is that no matter how high, how low, or how hard the hurdles are, it really tests you and grows you when you're able to get to the other side. So it's not really stopping you, but it's stopping everyone else from it, from trying to get it. And when you make it to the other side, you're a stronger or mentally fit version of yourself. And that's how I think about hurdles. And in my life, there's been so many hurdles. So for example, growing up, I was one of the few Asians in a Black neighborhood. You can imagine being bullied and just being socially isolated was a hurdle. And I wouldn't say that I even made friends until probably middle school. And even then, that was, so you imagine going to school and not having any friends for so many years. And then later on, going to high school, my high school was called like the worst high school in the US. And in fact, we actually lost our accreditation. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, you probably should know what it is. But out of the 40,000 school districts in the US, we were basically at the bottom. We were the only one that did not. So basically, I could have gone to FedEx or Kinko, printed out my high school diploma at the time, and it had the same value as the paper that the actual diploma would have been printed on. But of course, I had a bunch of supporters who just believed in me. And that's what a journey to Yale and Harvard came in. It was like so many hurdles. Like, for example, I didn't know anyone who had gone to an Ivy League school in my community. So I had to figure it all out. So for example, the SAT at the time was out of 2,400 and the national average is 1,500. Yale, Harvard was about 2,200. And my high school was averaging like 1,100 out of it. And so you can imagine the difficulty having to figure it out, how to get there. And then afterwards, figuring out how do I actually, Yale or Harvard cost like half or $250,000, $250,000 over 4 years. How do I raise that money without taking a loan? How do I get scholarships? Like no one had the answer to all this. And so I had to figure it out myself. And it's the same thing when starting my consulting offer was just in the beginning, you're starting a business, and even though you come into consulting, there's a lot of things that you don't know. Like for example, the first time we had a partnership with a university, well, how do I navigate this? And the first time, for example, I was supposed to give for example, Harvard invited me to go speak on behalf of my consulting offer, and there was a tornado or not tornado, hurricane going through, but some part of the coast, and so my flight was delayed. So I had to book another flight. So I came in there, and when I landed, I was like 2 hours away from the event. I couldn't land into Boston where Harvard was inviting me. So I had to land into Rhode Island, which is about 2 hours away, and I had to take an Uber to drive all the way up there. I'm like, oh, why am I going to pay for this? My business just started. And I get in there and remember there's like rain pouring. So I'm like trenched. So I go into the Harvard presentation trenched. But I get there only 10 minutes late, and then there's a hurricane, flight delays, and all that. So there's always like these hurdles and these obstacles that really touch you. Like, do you want to continue to go? And as I mentioned earlier, like 2020 was one of those hurdles where all of a sudden the world just froze, and of course people were uncertain, are consulting firms even hiring? Because if they're not hiring, then the value of my consulting offer, which helps you get interviews and offers in consulting, is like, where do we sit on this? Do I have to let go of my team? So there's definitely a lot of hurdles that have to go through and obstacles. But each time I always think about it is like the fact that I say this in such a privileged position where I always remind myself of this, is that it's a privileged position. For example, a lot of my friends, they are back home in our home community, and there's only one job for them to do. But for me, it's kind of like if 2020 had erased all that, I still would have been fine. I still had savings. I still could have done something. I could have gone back to Bain if Bain was taking it. I could have done it's like so many things that could have been done. As in, I could have probably have been part of the CDC, for example, and joined them because they probably needed data analytics to track the COVID spread and so forth. There's just like so many things that could have happened, and say that in first position. But every time you overcome an obstacle, you just become a bigger version of yourself, both physically, mentally, and so forth. And so that's how I always think about hurdles, is like, yes, constant hurdles. There's no one big hurdle that I would say like the one hurdle in my life, because I've had multiple hurdles and continue to have so. And it's part of life.
Yeah, for sure. That's very pretty inspiring. You've come across so many hurdles, gone past it, and that's very inspiring. What do you think? People often meet you, and what do you think people misunderstand about you? And what would you like to correct them about?
Well, people have different opinions of people, including myself and so forth. I wouldn't say there's anything I wouldn't correct, as in I'm always open to feedback and so forth. So I wouldn't say there's anything I want to correct. It's just it is what it is, right? It is. I'll say hopefully mostly positive, as in looking online, most of my reviews are positive. My team thinks I'm a 10 out of 10 CEO, but who knows? Maybe someone secretly is a 1 out of 10, but they didn't want to put it on Glassdoor. Who knows?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's. Um, Then who is one person you think has inspired you to achieve your goals?
My grandma. That's the easy one. So my grandma came over here from Vietnam during the war. She basically took my family and did everything she could to get us into the States. And so at the time it was my grandpa, my grandma. My grandpa had just come back from war, and my grandma had to take care of the family while my grandpa was out at war. And of course, she had my two uncles, my mom. So she's basically caring for this family, a total of five. And when they came to the US, they only had like $200, and she had to make do. And she didn't have a high school diploma. She didn't have a college degree. She didn't have formal English training. She didn't have any of this. And yet she just did everything that she could to be able to figure out. She never complained. Like, for example, she worked as a cleaner when she first got here. And then she worked as a luggage handler at Delta Airport or Delta Airlines afterwards to be able to make more income and eventually save up. And she would eventually open up her own nail salon because she always had a dream that she wanted to become an entrepreneur, which of course during the war was a little hard to do. And so my grandma becomes this inspiration for me because when she first started her nail salon, she started it with no business experience. She bootstrapped the whole thing, and it was just her and my grandpa. And I remember some of the stories growing up, and I remember being at this. Like, for example, when my grandma opened a shop, at some point it was like same issue we had was like, how do you get recognized? And of course, we're Asian in a Hispanic and Black community, so it's like, wow, are people actually going to go? And I remember the first couple of years, people didn't want my grandma to succeed. Like, for example, there was one time where when she started to do well, someone set the store on fire when she was doing well, and people knew that she kept cash on hand. There was a robbery that came at gunpoint where she gave up the money. And then at other times when people broke in and stole the stuff overnight, it's just like all these obstacles that she actually had to deal with. And so when I had to deal with things like, for example, oh, our website broke down for a few hours. So I'm like, well, my grandma had her thing broken into. It's not as big of an issue. And so that's how I think about my grandma. Is definitely the one who inspires me the most, just because she was willing to take these risks. And she didn't have a safety net of a college degree. She didn't have a safety net of having worked at Bain that she can go back. And so every time I think of my problems are big, I always think about my grandma and say, no, my problems aren't big. Because my grandma had to care for our family, and in a new country where there was no family, no safety net, no friends. And so my problems in comparison, they're like hills compared to the mountains that my grandma had to scale.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. And that's, that's inspiring to me as an entrepreneur. I think, your grandma definitely inspires to put out that, that level of entrepreneurship after not having an education, college education. That's just inspiring, not having that safety net, as you said. If you could go back to yourself as an 18-year-old, if you could go back to your 18-year-old self, what is some advice after so much experience? What is some advice you would give to yourself at the age of 18?
At 18, I was like, you're gonna do great. As in anyway, right? Like, because I will tell you, I made so many mistakes and things that I'm like, oh, so embarrassing, or things that you think back, you're like, oh, that's really cringy. But I wouldn't tell myself to do anything differently, just because if I like who I am today, every little experience, whether or not I thought it significant at the time, would be significant. Like, for example, I'll share a story, which is at one point in college, and looking back, you're like, of course you're not going to do this. Why would you do this? Is one of the girls that I wanted to date, who had a crush on. I realized that, oh, she had a certain song, and I had a dance performance coming up. I was like, hey, why don't I serenade her, even though she does not like being made a spotlight in public. But after I did that, I was like, wow, there's not like much embarrassing you can do for the rest of your time in college. So this is definitely a little light here. But every night, it's like, well, everything else I can go and pursue, right? So I wouldn't change anything about or give my advice anything differently, just because it would alter who I am. So I always believe in like little small changes can affect everything. So it's kind of like, unless I don't like who I am, then I would go back. But I would say I took advantage of everything I could at Yale. It's like you go from someone, the way I thought about it is that my high school didn't have much funding. Like, for example, when I was organizing our math team, and we're trying to raise like $100 to rent a bus for the day so that we can go to a math competition. And then all of a sudden there's this abundance in college where it's like, oh, I could just apply and get $2,000 for my club, like just like with one form. It's like, wow, I had to go like so hard to even get $100 for a bus. And so it really just really taught me that just go out there. And so I wouldn't tell myself anything differently, because who knows, it would alter my path. And if you like who you are, then I wouldn't change it.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. That's important advice. If you had to write a book tomorrow, what do you think you would write about?
About to write a book. I mentioned this earlier, so probably about obstacles and
Yeah.
about just overcoming them. I would say if I had to have a title for it, I don't know, maybe it's like it's gonna be okay, or you'll get stronger. And it's like one of those things where I would probably write a book about just framing the current obstacles that you're facing, and then knowing that at the end of it, things are going to be okay. People go through highs and lows. And then if you've ever seen it, I remember in high school, one of my science teachers had a poster on board. He's like, success is not a straight line. And of course, it's like one of those zigzags we go up and down. It's like, that's quite true. And so that's what I would talk about. It's like how to handle these obstacles in your life, how to get to the other side, because when you do, you get to inspire other people. So I always think about, well, this hurdle I'm going through. So when I was in high school, I always joked to myself, Davis, you're going to be an inspiration to other students who want to go to Ivy League schools, but you have to get into an Ivy League school first. So let's figure this out. And when I was at Yale going to interviewing at McKinsey and Bain, I had like 3 weeks while other people were interviewing for years in advance. Like even you already started your freshman year knowing, oh, banking and consulting are the paths. I didn't even know that until my senior year, of course. And so I thought to myself, you know, I'm going to be an inspiration to someone who decides last minute they want to go into consulting, and this could change their career. So I'm going to do that. And every moment during COVID, for example, during 2020, I said, wow, I'm going to be an inspiration later on for a future, hopefully no pandemic, but anything happens in the future, I want to be an inspiration to those entrepreneurs who are going through rough times as well. And so that's pretty much the message. Like, who can you be an inspiration for?
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely important topic to write about. Hurdles definitely, help you figure out what you did wrong, and what could help so many people out there in the future. So this is a question, personally, I think, so if I give it like, it's a tricky question. If I give you $100 million today, what is something you would do with the money? You could do anything in the world. You could invest anywhere. You could maybe buy a company. You could even enjoy. If you just want to just travel around the world, that's okay. But what would you do with $100 million?
I donate it. As in, I would donate it. As in, there's so many worthy causes that I already currently donate to. As in, because I grew up quite poor, we didn't need much money to live on. Like even frugally, I live today pretty frugally, and it's like a lot of my money I just donate to several causes of everything from St. Jude's Hospital, which was one that I volunteered in when I was in high school, and I continue voluntary, to scholarship funds for first generation college students, to building schools. So in between my time in college and Bain, for example, I worked at an organization called Pencils of Promise. And Pencils of Promise just build schools in villages that don't have schools because of the power of education, right? And so I would just donate it, as in $100 million is great, but it's kind of like, there's only so much. I wouldn't really much change anything much about me. Like, for example, yeah, it wouldn't really change much about who I am. So I would just donate it, because to me, it's just the point of money is to solve problems. And the problems I think are worth solving are the problems that I could have been born. Like, for example, if my grandma had not come to the US, or if I was born in another country, or if I had accidentally not been supported by taking a class or run to this person or so forth. There's so many opportunities. And for me, it's like, and it's the same thing I talk about in my TED Talk too, is like, how do you create opportunities for people in the world? And that's what I want to do. And that's what Myconsultingoffer does actually, is that we donate a huge portion of our profits to nonprofits that we partner with, just because for us, it's like, yes, you change one life by having someone get a consulting offer, but you also get to change for so many other people's lives as well. For example, for every offer, we basically fund a classroom, for example, if we do Pencils of Promise for an entire year. And so there's so many things that we can do with it. And so short answer is like, I just donate to causes that pretty much create opportunities for people.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great answer. I think, you're not changing your lifestyle. A lot of people come in the podcast, tell me that you want to change it, but this is you. And I think that's really, really nice that you're trying to help out people who are probably in the place you were, and now could make an impact in the future. Just wrapping up things now for I think the final question. If, it's called role reversal. If you could ask me a question, if you want to know anything about me, you could ask me any question you want or not. It's up to you. But if you want to know anything, that's something I let my guests have, that you can ask me anything you want at all.
Awesome. All right. Quick question. Do you hear the blender in the background? I'll turn off the blender since we're recording. Do you hear it, or no blender?
No, I don't hear it. It's perfectly fine. Don't worry.
All right. If you don't hear the blender, okay, there's a blender going off right now. But question for you is, Well, you shared earlier before we hired on the call your motivations for this as well, right? For why you're doing this podcast, why you and your team are doing this too is, so here's a question for you is, where do you see your future currently after having gone through, at least at the time of this recording, you're already done 6 of these interviews, right? Is what's the future for you? As in, where are you planning? As in, what do you want to get out of your time at Ohio?
I think personally, that's a great question. My time at Ohio, I'm pretty sure, this podcast is a major part of it. I want to definitely, continue this through my 4 years, or even after that, if time permits, even after the 4 years, just, just meeting and talking to those people around. And um, so just anyone at all, just impacting people's lives through the podcast is what, my aim is in these 4 years, and even after that, probably. My time at Ohio specifically, talking about that, I just want to make my connections, talk to a lot of people. That's what I try to do. I try to set my day up in a way that I at least meet a new person every day from my college or just from outside and talk to them. Just have a general conversation from a person from a company or person just who's studying in any degree at Ohio State, and trying to understand where they come from, what are the impacts they're trying to make. Because I like startups, and something I've really been interested in. So any problems, they talk to me about so many things. So you can find so many new problems through that, and problems create startups. So if you can just find those problems, you can definitely create a new startup, new age thing. Facebook came out of one of the most weirdest ways. His girlfriend broke up. Mark Zuckerberg's girlfriend broke up with him. He made a startup, not for the correct reasons, but later just turned out to be Facebook. So you never know what's the next opportunity going to take. But I'm just trying to take every day at a time and try to learn what I can get out of it. And this podcast definitely helps me through that, because just inviting someone to a inviting many people just to talk to me would be hard, but inviting them to a podcast is so much easier, and they impact so many more people, not just me as a person. So
awesome. How can I be supportive besides listening to the episodes? How can I be helpful to you?
I just think that, no, actually, you're just a great connection now. And I'm definitely, you would have a different perspective of life in a couple of years from now, maybe getting you back on in a couple of years. I think that'll be great, just to have you on, making connections, just listing people. I think I'm going to, I'm putting up a website now, working on that, working on trying to build a proper setup. And that's just, coming in. When you come in first, you don't have that setup, but slowly, as you build that setup, making a website, taking that time. But I think that's just, trying to progress in ways, and, all your support, everyone just who's there supporting me, that's enough,
Awesome. I'm glad I've been able to support, and excited to come back in a few years and see where we both are.
For sure. Thank you so much for being here today, Davis.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me.